The Watchers of the Void had existed since before the first stars burned. They were not alive in any way that most beings would understand. They were something older, something stranger. Their purpose was simple: observe, document, and record. Across infinite dimensions and countless realities, they watched the rise and fall of civilizations. They cataloged the birth of species and the death of worlds. They did not interfere. They did not judge. They simply watched. In all their endless existence, they had documented 10,000 intelligent species. They had seen empires that spanned galaxies crumble to dust. They had watched gods die and new ones rise to take their place. They believed they had seen everything that could be seen. They were wrong. The anomaly began in a dimension the Watchers had classified as unremarkable. A small blue planet orbited a yellow star in an average galaxy. The dominant species called themselves humans. The Watchers had made notes about them before. They were young as species went, barely a flicker in cosmic terms. They were violent and tribal, yet strangely cooperative. They built weapons that could destroy their world while simultaneously creating art that made no logical sense. The Watchers found them mildly interesting, but ultimately ordinary. Then the rift tore open. The swarm had known that anyone remembered. They existed only to consume. They moved between dimensions like a plague, devouring everything in their path. Worlds, species, entire realities had fallen to their hunger. They did not think. They did not feel. They simply ate and then moved on to the next meal. They had been their latest victims. They were a peaceful species, their bodies made of living crystal that sang with harmonic frequencies. They had no weapons because they had never needed any. Their world had been beautiful, filled with music and light and gentle kindness. The swarm had consumed it in 3 days. But some had escaped. A small group of their young, barely more than children, had fled through the dimensional tier that the swarm had created. They ran blindly, desperately, their crystalline bodies flickering with terror. Behind them, the screams of their parents faded into silence. They emerged in a place none of them understood. The ground was hard and flat. Strange lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled wrong, filled with unfamiliar scents. The children huddled together, their harmonic frequencies reduced to whimpers of fear. They were in a large room with wooden floors and high ceilings. Colorful markings covered the walls. Strange equipment lined the edges of the space. They had arrived in the gymnasium of elementary school in rural Montana. It was 4:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in late October. The Watchers detected the dimensional breach immediately. They deployed observation constructs to the location, invisible probes that would record everything that happened. The lead archivist, an ancient entity called the Chronicler, reviewed the data with what might have been curiosity, an incursion into a primitive world. The outcome seemed obvious. The local species would be overwhelmed. The children would be consumed. Another tragic footnote for the infinite records. But the Chronicler decided to watch anyway. Something about this situation felt different, though it could not explain why. Cole was grading papers in his classroom when he heard the crash. He was 47 years old, a former Marine who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before a piece of shrapnel in his knee ended his military career. He had become a 4th-grade teacher because he wanted to build things instead of break them. His students thought he was strict but fair. They did not know about the nightmares that still woke him some nights. He moved toward the gymnasium with the careful alertness that years of combat had burned into his bones. The hallway was empty. Most students had gone home, but a few remained for after-school activities. He could hear voices from the music room where was helping students with their science fair projects. The gymnasium doors were closed. A strange light pulsed beneath them, colors that had never seen before. He pushed them open. The children screamed, or rather they made a sound like breaking glass mixed with a choir's desperate wail, froze for only a moment. He saw creatures that could not exist, children made of crystal, their bodies transparent and glowing with inner light. Behind them, a tear in reality itself, a wound in the air that showed a darkness filled with moving shapes. Cole did not run. He did not call for help. He stepped into the gymnasium and closed the doors behind him. The watchers noted this behavior with interest. The human's heart rate had increased significantly. His body was flooding with stress hormones. Every biological instinct should have driven him to flee from the unknown threat. Instead, he moved toward the alien children and knelt down to their level. "Hey," he said softly, "it's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The children did not understand his words, but they understood his tone. One of them, the smallest, stopped wailing. Its crystalline face turned toward him and saw something he recognized in its strange features. Fear, pure, simple childhood fear. He had seen that look before, in villages in Afghanistan, in the eyes of children who had lost everything. He had promised himself that he would never ignore that look again. "I don't know what you are," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "But you're scared and you're just kids, so we're going to figure this out together, okay?" Appeared in the doorway. She was 29 years old, a second-generation immigrant whose parents had fled Mumbai with nothing. She had become a science teacher because she believed that knowledge was the most powerful tool anyone could possess. She was practical and quick-thinking, and when she saw the impossible scene in the gymnasium, her mind immediately began categorizing and analyzing. She asked, "What is happening?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but close the door and help me." She did not hesitate. She closed the door and crossed the gymnasium to kneel beside him. The children watched them both, their harmonic frequencies settling into something less panicked. Then the first scout emerged from the rift. It was wrong in ways that the human mind struggled to process. It had too many limbs, and its body seemed to shift and change as it moved. Its mouth was a circular pit lined with countless teeth. It made no sound at all as it pulled itself into the gymnasium and oriented on the children. Cole stood up. He was not armed. He had no weapon, no training for fighting predators, no logical reason to believe he could do anything against this creature. But he positioned himself between the monster and the children anyway. He said quietly, "Get them out of here." "What are you?" "Now." The creature charged. It moved faster than anything that size should move, met it with nothing but his body and his refusal to let it pass. He grabbed one of its limbs and twisted, using leverage and momentum the way he had been taught decades ago. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and felt something in his shoulder pop, but he held on. Gathered the children. She did not speak their language, but she did not need to. She pointed, she gestured, she herded them toward the door with calm efficiency. The children followed her, their crystal bodies flickering with residual fear but also something else. Hope. Helen met them in the hallway. She was the school librarian, 73 years old with silver hair and arthritic hands. She had worked at elementary for 41 years. She had seen children come and go, had watched them grow and struggle and succeed. She did not understand what she was seeing now, but she understood one thing perfectly. Children needed protection. "This way," she said, her voice steady. "The library has only one entrance. It's easier to defend." The watchers observed. The chronicler watched Cole fight a creature he could not possibly defeat, buying time with his own body. It watched lead alien children through hallways as if this were simply an unusual fire drill. It watched Helen, old and fragile, prepare to shelter beings from another dimension. The chronicler made a note in the record. Human response to incursion does not match predicted behavior. Further observation required. It had no idea what it was about to witness. Stumbled into the library 15 minutes later. His shirt was torn and bloody. 3 deep gashes ran across his back where the creature had clawed him before he managed to break its neck with a basketball pole. Immediately began treating his wounds with supplies from the nurse's office. "There are more," he said. "Coming through that tier, we need to get out of here." Helen shook her head. "Phones are dead, power just went out, and listen." They listened. Outside, they could hear sounds that did not belong in Montana in October, shrieks and crashes, the screech of metal screaming. The town whispered, closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at the children, who were huddled in the corner of the library surrounded by picture books they could not read. "Then we hold here," he said, "until help comes." The siege of elementary school had begun. The first night was the longest, organized what defenses he could manage with the limited resources available. He barricaded the library entrance with desks. He found a fire axe in the hallway emergency case and handed it to Helen, who accepted it without question, raided her science classroom, and returned with chemicals that she said could create deterrence. "It won't kill them," she admitted, "but it should slow them down." The children watched everything with wide, frightened eyes. The smallest one, the one who had first responded to, made a soft humming sound. It was not words exactly, but understood it anyway. "Thank you." The watchers continued their observation. More constructs had been deployed to capture every angle, every moment. The chronicler had flagged this incident for priority documentation, though it still could not explain why these events felt significant. They came in waves. The first attack happened at midnight. 3 creatures threw themselves against the barricade with mindless hunger, met them with the fire axe while sprayed her chemical mixture into their faces. The creatures shrieked and recoiled, buying precious seconds. Helen stood behind them both, a heavy encyclopedia in her hands, ready to strike anything that got past. They held. The second attack came at dawn. More creatures this time, 5 or 6. It was hard to count when they moved so fast and changed so constantly. Was wounded again, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. Had burns on her hands from her own chemicals. Helen had not slept at all. But they held. Other humans began to arrive as the sun rose. Parents who had come to the school looking for their children found something they never expected. Some of them ran. Most of them did not. A bus driver named picked up a metal baseball bat and joined at the barricade. A janitor named Thomas Wright started fortifying the windows with wooden boards. A mother named Sarah, who had trained as a nurse, began treating the wounded. None of them questioned the alien children. None of them asked why they should risk their lives for creatures from another dimension. They simply saw children in danger and responded. The watchers watched humans form a defensive perimeter around a school library. They watched ordinary people with no training and no weapons stand against predators. They watched acts of courage that served no evolutionary purpose, protected no genetic legacy, gained no advantage of any kind. The chronicler requested clarification from subordinate observers. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps the humans believed the alien children had resources they could exploit. Perhaps there was some territorial instinct at work, a primitive drive to defend claimed space. Perhaps the humans simply did not understand what they were facing. The subordinates reported back, negative on all counts. The humans understood exactly what they were facing. They had no expectation of reward or survival. They were simply choosing to protect children who were not their own. The chronicler found this data deeply troubling. The second night brought new challenges. Food was running low. Water had to be rationed. The wounded needed rest they could not get, and the attacks were becoming more frequent, more coordinated. They were learning. But something else was happening too. Discovered that certain sounds seemed to calm the children. She began humming lullabies her mother had sung to her as a child, old songs from India, with melodies that rose and fell like gentle waves. The crystalline children responded with harmonic frequencies that blended with her voice, creating something beautiful and strange. Helen read stories to them. She could not know if they understood the words, but they understood the rhythm, the comfort of an old woman's voice speaking softly in the darkness. She read them picture books about friendship and courage and kindness. She read them stories about small creatures who faced big challenges and won. Kept watch. He had not slept in 2 days. His wounds were infected despite Sarah's best efforts. He knew, with the certainty of a soldier who had faced death before, that he would not survive this siege. But he also knew, with equal certainty, that he would not stop fighting until the children were safe. The children began to trust their human protectors. The smallest one, who the humans had started calling Crystal, would hold Helen's hand during the attacks. Another one, taller and older, helped mix her chemical deterrents. A third stood beside at the barricade, its crystalline body glowing with fierce light whenever the creatures came. On the morning of the third day counted 13 human defenders. 3 were badly wounded. 2 were elderly. 1 was a teenager who had been trapped at the school during soccer practice. None of them had left. None of them would leave. Had lost 2 fingers to a bite. He was still swinging his baseball bat with his other hand. Thomas Wright had a broken rib that made every breath painful. He was still boarding up windows. Sarah had not eaten in 24 hours. She was still treating the wounded. The Watchers had no framework for what they were observing. In all their infinite experience, they had seen species fight for survival, for territory, for resources, for reproduction. They had seen parents die for offspring, saw soldiers die for causes. But they had never seen strangers die for children who were not even the same species. The chronicler began to suspect that their classification of humanity as ordinary had been a significant error. The final assault came on the third night. They had been massing beyond the school grounds, dozens of them now, perhaps hundreds. The humans could hear them in the darkness, that terrible silence that preceded their attacks. Everyone knew that this would be the end. Gathered the defenders in the library. His face was pale from blood loss and his eyes were bright with fever, but his voice was steady. "We can't win this," he said. "Not against that many, but we don't have to win, we just have to hold until help gets here." "What help?" asked. "Nobody's coming." "Somebody's coming," said. "They have to be. The military, the government, somebody. We just have to give them time." Helen looked at the children, who were huddled together in their corner, their crystalline bodies dimmed with exhaustion and fear. Crystal was holding a picture book that Helen had read to her 3 times. "How much time?" Helen asked. Met her eyes. They both knew the answer. "As long as it takes." The attack began at midnight. The creatures came from all directions, smashing through windows and walls. The barricade at the main entrance fell in seconds. The humans fell back to their secondary positions, fighting every step of the way. Held the doorway to the library. He had given the fire axe to Thomas and armed himself with a metal pipe. The first creature that came through the door, he killed with a blow to what might have been its head. The second one, he killed by jamming the pipe through its body and using its own momentum to throw it aside. The third one got past his guard and raked claws across his chest. He kept fighting. The Watchers documented everything. They recorded the exact moment when Cole's heart stopped beating, his body finally giving out after 3 days of wounds and exhaustion and impossible effort. They recorded his last words, spoken not to his fellow humans but to the alien children behind him. "Run, keep running, don't stop." Took his place in the doorway. She had prepared one final chemical mixture, something unstable and dangerous. She held it in her burned hands and waited for the creatures to mass in front of her. "Get the children out the back," she told Sarah. "There's a window in the storage room. Go." "Go now." The Watchers recorded the explosion. They calculated the blast radius with perfect precision, exactly large enough to destroy the swarm cluster that had gathered at the library entrance, exactly small enough to leave the children's escape route intact. Had done the math in her head, had known exactly what would happen. She triggered the mixture anyway. Her last thought was satisfaction, that she had gotten the calculations right. Helen did not try to fight. She was too old, too slow, too fragile. Instead, she gathered the children around her in the storage room and began to read aloud from the picture book that Crystal loved. It was a story about a little rabbit who got lost but found its way home. The creatures breached the storage room. Helen did not stop reading. Her voice never wavered, never trembled, never showed any fear. The children pressed close to her, their harmonic frequencies blending with her words in a song of desperate hope. The watchers recorded the exact moment when Helen died, still reading, still speaking words of comfort and kindness. The creature that killed her hesitated for a moment afterward, as if confused by prey that showed no fear. That hesitation lasted long enough for Sarah to get the last of the children through the window. The children ran into the night. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of fighting, of humans dying to buy them more seconds, more steps, more distance. They ran until they could not run anymore. Then the sky lit up with fire. The military had finally arrived. Jets screamed overhead, dropping ordnance on the positions. Helicopters landed to deploy soldiers with weapons that actually worked against the creatures. The dimensional rift was located and sealed with technology that the humans had improvised from alien research and desperate engineering. The siege of elementary school was over. The watchers completed their documentation. They recorded the names of every human who had died: Cole, Helen, Thomas Wright, and 7 others who had chosen to stand against the impossible. They recorded the survival of all 23 children. The chronicler reviewed the complete record. It had observed 10,000 species across infinite dimensions. It had documented courage and cowardice, heroism and horror, but it had never seen anything like this. These humans had died for children who were not their own, not for genetic benefit, not for resources, not for territory. They had died because the children were scared and alone, and the humans had decided that was enough. The chronicler added a notation to the file. It was unprecedented, a break from protocols that had existed since before the first stars, but the chronicler felt it was necessary. She's designation, human. Previous classification, Category 7, Apex Predator. Recommended reclassification, new category required. Existing taxonomies insufficient. These beings possess a capacity we have not previously documented. They will sacrifice themselves for the vulnerable, even when the vulnerable are strangers, even when there is no hope of success, even when every logical calculation demands retreat. This is not rational behavior. It may not be sane behavior. But it is something we have never observed in 10,000 species across a million realities. Further study urgently recommended. Approach with caution. Approach with respect. And perhaps, for the first time in our existence, approach with hope. 50 years later, the children returned to Earth. They were adults now, their crystalline bodies fully grown, their harmonic frequencies rich with the music of long lives well lived. They came to Montana, to a small town to a place that had once been an elementary school. It was a memorial now, a simple stone structure with names carved into its walls: Cole, Helen, and all the others who had stood against the darkness. They added something to the memorial. They sang, all 23 of them together, a harmonic frequency that resonated across dimensions. It was a song of gratitude, of remembrance, of love for the strangers who had become family in the worst moments of their lives. Somewhere in the space between realities, the watchers heard the song. The chronicler made a final note in the record. The humans would want to know they are not forgotten. They will never be forgotten. Across all dimensions, for as long as the watchers exist, the story of will be told. Not as a footnote, not as a curiosity, but as proof that even in an infinite universe of darkness and hunger and fear, there are beings who will stand in the doorway and say, "Not these children, not today." The song echoed through the memorial. Crystal, the smallest of the survivors, now grown tall and bright, placed her crystalline hand against Cole's name. "Thank you," she sang. "Thank you for being afraid and fighting anyway. Thank you for being wounded and standing anyway. Thank you for being human." The watchers recorded it all. They would never stop watching. But now, for the first time, They watched with something like wonder,